He's one of the leading infectious disease authorities in the world. We love having him right in the Bay Area, and he's a terrific spokesperson for
Yeah.
getting out medical information and the real story amidst the anxieties that create falsehoods around these pandemics and infectious diseases. Please welcome from UCSF, Dr. Peter Chin-Ha. Hello, doctor.
Hello, Mark. Hello, Kim.
It is so cool to have you in the mix. I have so many questions to ask you because I, for 3 years, have just focused on COVID. Has it been that long, Doctor? It's been is it 3 years? Something on that. It feels like.
It feels like yesterday when we were just dancing in the streets in 2019. But yeah, it's been 3 years, and I feel like Rip Van Winkle have waking up, I guess. And I'm going to Trader Joe's, and the lines are like really huge right now.
It is wild how we've sort of gotten back to normal. The reality is, I feel as though you were one of the people who was saying eventually COVID will get to be this sort of low simmer that we're aware of, but it won't force society on its side the way it did for the first year.
Exactly. Pandemics do end. And I think that's what we're seeing right now. It doesn't mean that some people are not getting still very ill. And we still have about 20 patients at UCSF, but nothing like 150 1 year ago. So, things are spiraling downwards. But it's important for people to continue to protect themselves, particularly if you're more vulnerable.
And the reason that the numbers have dropped, is it because of a herd immunity? Is it because of vaccination thresholds? What's the reason?
I think the herd immunity, well, not really herd immunity, but people's immunity in the population is getting better and better. And the better it gets, the harder it is for that virus to ping pong from one person to the next. So, you've seen media reports of lots of scary variants and things like that with COVID. But it doesn't matter how scary the variant looks, because the soil in which the variant is landing is becoming more and more inhospitable. But that same variant, if it goes, in China, it's estimated now to have probably killed 1 million people or so, even though that's kind of under the wraps. But it's because it's a very different population from ours right now.
I want to ask you about these other emerging pandemics, potential pandemics, okay, emerging viruses. We've seen what the bird flu has done, the avian flu, and it's forced the extermination of all of these poor animals. I don't know what the numbers are. I was saying before, it could be hundreds of millions. There's so many, it's worldwide. But I also have seen it now reportedly having moved into the mammalian population. So it has made that jump from the birds into mammals. How concerned should we be about this?
I think in the immediate period, we're not too concerned, but in the medium term, I wouldn't even say long term, it is a continued threat. Most people thought that the next pandemic we had before COVID was going to be avian flu. If you look at the history of pandemics in the world, we've had five pandemics caused by flu in the last 100 years, and all of them have been caused by avian flu. So this new one that we're seeing is just a matter of time before it gets into the human population. In fact, it already has. It's just not as efficiently transmitted from human to human yet, but at some point it's going to get a mutation pretty soon to allow that to happen.
So just to put a point on it, a mountain lion, a bear, and a skunk are some of the latest victims of this bird flu virus spreading around the world. And now it's being considered. The WHO is talking about this, and then there's another outbreak. I'll get to that in a second, totally different virus. They're considering vaccinations in some places. So they're testing avian vaccines. And I'm wondering if you can give me a state of the state on that, and what is your disposition toward that? Wouldn't there be the same mutations that we saw with COVID?
No, it's very different. So I brought my little puppets here again. So everybody remembers COVID with the spikes. Influenza is not like COVID. It's this is actually one of the. Actually, let me give you another. Influenza is a little bit simpler. but it still can cause a lot of
So cute.
have mutations that can actually get into the human population. So the way it happens is that there are lots of different flu species that affect different or different variants that affect different populations. Like there's a pig influenza, there's a bird influenza, and that's bird flu. There's a human influenza. But what happens is that one type of, like, say a pig gets infected with a human influenza, but also can get affected with with a bird influenza. They can kind of mate and exchange these mutations, and then it'll be easier to have a human infected, and that's the kind of problem that we're seeing.
Wow, that's scary. I mean, it's like that's the Frankensteinian thing where there's a little bit of this one and a little bit of that one. Does that make coming up with a vaccine more difficult?
So with the vaccine, I think there is a H5N1 vaccine that was piloted. It's being stockpiled right now by the United States and some other countries. But the problem is, like you alluded to, Mark, if this virus mutates more, that vaccine would probably not be as good. I mean, it's good for what we know so far, but not probably good for the mutation. So if it does happen, unfortunately, I think we'll see some lockdowns again while people have enough time to build the next generation of vaccines. It probably won't be the same amount of time because we have mRNA technology now. So in the old days, it might take 5 to 7 months. I think we might get away in about 2 to 3 months if it does come on board.
That's the H5N1, just to be clear, if people
Yes.
are just joining us. That's what we're talking about. This is the new avian flu strain. The strains of a virus out of Africa, Doctor, are incredibly deadly, with essentially, as I was reading, the same list of symptoms, and sort of the way it offs you is the most awful way. You bleed out. I mean, it's like some kind of a sci-fi novel or something. And the other thing is that prior to you being killed in this awful way by this virus, there aren't any symptoms. It's sort of there's a period of asymptomatic exposure, and then boom, you're done in a matter of, I don't know, you can tell me how quickly, but it can be very quick.
That's scary.
Yeah, so I mean, I think what you're talking about in terms of other kinds of potential outbreaks, although I do think avian flu is probably the one that most people are scared about for the next pandemic. But there are lots of other things circulating around. I think everybody's heard about Ebola, and that's one of the kinds of what we call hemorrhagic viruses, which, like you said, Mark, causes people to just bleed out from all these orifices, like your nose and mouth, and it's the reason why recently we had airport closures to some people coming from Uganda because there was a recent outbreak of Ebola in Uganda while COVID was still going on. So if you think about, the world, I don't mean to be a Debbie Downer or to be alarmist, because I'm still, going out and enjoying myself. But, the WHO has declared 7 public health emergencies of international concern since 2007. And they include things that people have heard about, like chikungunya and Zika and COVID and monkeypox or Mpox, Ebola. So I think we're seeing it fast and furious on. What it means is that, there are 2 things. One is, or 3 things, I would say. One is globalization. So it's just easy to spread one virus from one country to the next by air transport. If you remember all those movies like with Gwyneth Paltrow and flu and all that stuff, it's the same idea. The second reason, of course, is the fact that we as humans are going into territories because our population is getting bigger and bigger to set up homes, like in the Central Valley with valley fever, for example. So you're building homes into places that humans haven't been before. So you're going to be interacting with these sort of like weird viruses spread by bats and things like that. And the third reason, of course, is that climate change. So climate change is just making it easier for pathogens or vectors like certain types of mosquitoes and things like that to live in places where they wouldn't have normally lived were it not for climate change.
Yeah, this is, you really articulate so well why the danger is there. The reason these things jump to the human population is because of this mammalian host or something, and that, for example, in Guinea or with the Ebola virus, as you just said, or in Uganda, that's
Yes.
what happens.
Yeah, so if you even think about HIV, it was thought to be transmitted to humans from mammals, from monkeys actually, because humans were going into the forest and getting more and more exposure to wild animals for bushmeat or for exotic meat, and that's how it probably jumped for HIV from the macaques or the rhesus from the monkey primate population to humans. So we're seeing the same theme repeated over and over again with lots of other kinds of things like Ebola. It's similar in that way.
I want to get I'll get to this John Watson question.
Okay.
It's up on screen. Let's just get to it now. If you get it for a second time, COVID, oftentimes you can get sicker. That is sort of counterintuitive. Why is that?
You don't get sicker the second. Some people that with COVID you don't necessarily get sicker the second time you get it. Some people might get different symptoms, or it depends on when you get it too. With COVID in particular, but most people the second time you get it, it's milder. Some people might get different symptoms. So I think that's really the issue. There's one study in a vet population in St. Louis where they looked at this older veteran population, and they showed that the more times people got COVID in that population, the higher chance of getting long COVID or chronic symptoms, because you're just playing COVID roulette. But for most people, the second time you get COVID, it's getting better and better because your body has seen it before, same old, so it knows what to do. So that's generally for most people.
The thing I was going to ask you relates to something else that's showing up a lot in the chat, and I think was provoked a bit by a remark you made about if this happened, like let's say the bird flu, the latest H5, okay,
Right,
and H5N1 that broke big, or whatever other these looming viruses actually began to spread, and you needed to do things societally. We needed to get back to the dance that we've just done.
Yep.
And I'm seeing so now with that, against that backdrop, I'm seeing the whole list of Americans will never do that again. You could get away with maybe 2 weeks shutdown, maybe not even just 2 days shutdown. I'm not shutting down again. You get, this country, you get it. We've already been through it once, and we've sort of road tested how the whole thing went. My question to you is, how effective are the shutdowns? And because I remember you just mentioned China shut down completely, and now they have, it's a house on fire, right? And what do you think the appetite of the American public would be for another? So it's a lot in that question, but if you could take it.
Yeah. So let's think right now first about COVID. So it's not just the idea of shutting down. I think the shutting down actually did a lot of amazing good. When it happened, remember, San Francisco was the first in the world to really declare shelter in place. Then California did it as a state. But in that period of time, when we didn't have any therapies for COVID, we didn't have any vaccines, and the mortality rate was high, particularly in seniors. And that was essential for keeping our population with a lower mortality or death rate. In fact, when you look at California versus many parts in the world, we have some of the lowest per 100,000 death rates, and that's because of that early action. I think people are conflating that shutting down in a period with not necessarily thinking about when you shut down. So in the beginning of a pandemic, when you don't have anything, it's really important. Now, of course, you wouldn't shut down because we have so many tools and vaccines, and we know how to treat people, and we know about how it works. But if you think about avian flu H5N1, you're at least historically talking, because in 1996, it was the first human outbreak for this particular virus. and now it's mutating a little bit more even. You're talking about a 53% mortality rate. That means like 1 in 2 people who get it are going to die.
That's
potentially.
scary.
So
Big
I
time
think
scary.
that will probably motivate people to probably take it slow until we understand a little bit more. So I think it's different from COVID. I think everybody's over that. But with a new threat, when you don't know anything about it, that's going to drive people to behave the same way.
That's a great point. I didn't even think of that. I mean, obviously, if it's a different animal, if you'll pardon the expression, with that kind of mortality rate and potential, people will be a little less excited about going out and about interacting. Kim, did you have a question for Dr. Peter Chin Hong? I didn't
I
mean
have
to
so
dominate.
many questions for Dr. Peter Chin Hong. I have one realistic question and one completely ridiculous question. The first is, I was reading that after the COVID vaccine came out, that we might not be too far away from a vaccine for the common cold. Have you heard about that? And is that real?
Yes, that's totally real. People are working on it now. It's called a universal coronavirus vaccine because the common cold is caused by about 200 different viruses, and coronaviruses related to COVID are some of that. So I think that working on this universal coronavirus vaccine would help against many types of common colds, probably a large chunk, but probably not all of them, which will be an amazing thing in terms of quality of life. So that's being worked on. Different ways of giving the vaccine are being worked on. There is an inhaled vaccine that's already approved in China to supplement the injectable vaccine. So it just prevents people, we hope, from even getting symptomatic infection apart from keeping you away from the hospital.
Right.
So those are all things that we're seeing happening. There was even a recent study looking in animal population, which may get into humans eventually, of something called Shield, where you kind of essentially it's like almost like a food product, and you like coat the nose and the airways by a spray with something that looks like gelatin, and it just kind of keeps the virus from getting in the front door. So these are all, I think we have a lot of technology now. We understand viruses better. And we're more agile, but some of these are things that we'll be able to see in the future. At the end of the day, I think nobody's excited about getting a bunch of needles. If you can combine a lot of stuff in one needle, a two for example, a flu, COVID, or universal coronavirus vaccine,
Right.
people will be psyched about it.
So
I'd like. It's been a couple hours since I've had a vaccine, so I welcome a new one. Yeah, but that is, I do think that. Yeah, the delivery system's changing could be truly transformational. Go ahead, Kim. What was your ridiculous question?
My ridiculous question is, a lot of people are watching this show called The Last of Us. And it, have you seen it?
Yes, I love it.
So at the very beginning of the show, this infectious disease expert, who's no Dr. Peter Chin Hong, but yet there he is anyway, talks about if the temperature goes down as global warming happens, that their fungal infections will be more likely. And indeed, that's what happens 20 years after he gives this interview. Is there any possible way that if our body temperature changes, or if things environmentally change, that we could be looking at some weird thing like that?
I mean, it's more science fiction-y than reality right now, but I think, for example, in fungus, there's this, even in our backyard in the Central Valley, in Fresno, Modesto, all these areas, there's this thing people probably know about called valley fever or coccidioidomycosis. It's kind of like one of these bugs in infectious disease where when it's cold, it's kind of like a mold, but when it's hot, it becomes a yeast. So cold is mold and heat is yeast. So as you change the temperature, this organism goes like Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde into different forms, and different forms can have different ways of spreading. So say in the cocci thing, when it's cold, it grows up into a mold, and that can sporulate and like spread all over the place. And when it's in a body temperature, it can become infectious. So it's not totally out of the realm, but I'm not sure it will kill people like in The Last of Us
We're
or
not going to
make them
turn into
zombies.
no mushroom-headed zombies. That's
I
not
know.
no.
Although that bug, that fungus in The Last of Us is actually a real fungus. Doesn't affect humans, but affects insects, and it does make the insects move around to make it easier for the fungus to reproduce. So if you
Oh, how
look it up
weird.
and look up that particular organism, it is kind of like based on reality for insects.
Wow, man. Like we
That's
don't have
cool.
enough to worry about with the other viruses that we were talking about. And then they're even more on top of that you've alluded to. I don't know. Certainly, just to review as we say farewell, I'm so grateful for your time. The H5N1 is probably the front burner concern from the standpoint of infectious disease right now, right?
Yes, it is a front burner. Again, history repeats itself. And even if you think, we always talked about a 1918 flu pandemic that decimated so much of the world as a comparison to COVID, but that was caused by a different kind of avian flu. And the whole idea is the same. The audience knows about it. We humans haven't seen a new thing. The new thing can adapt to infect humans and spread from human to human, which we're seeing in mammals already, like you alluded to. And then in the beginning, we're going to be vulnerable to getting seriously ill.
Super last thing from the chat. Randy asks, can you ask the doctor about recent studies I've seen that indicate that KN95 and N95 were not really effective against COVID? I still wear a KN95 mask inside stores. He wants to know the truth about that, please.
Yeah, the truth is that it's still effective. The studies haven't really, it's hard to do a great study in a population level on masks because if you look at those studies, only about 40% of the people in the intervention arm wore the mask properly. Plus, it's hard to keep that controlled in the population. But when you look at studies in healthcare workers and in schools where you can control things more, those masks have been very effective, as well as laboratory studies.
Wow, there you go. It has been, Debbie says, hi, doc, your knowledge, advice, and encouragement got me through COVID. Wow.
Yeah. I still believe that listening to Dr. Peter Chin Hong is one of the reasons I haven't gotten COVID, and his discussion of COVID being COVID street smart.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Look at
amazing,
you,
Kevin.
Dr. Peter Chin Hong. A lot of
Yeah.
people, a lot of love for Dr. Peter Chin Hong. Normally, I'd be threatened by another man getting that kind of love in my presence. But in your case, I think you deserve it. We really do adore you. All right. Normally, I bring you in and let you go with reggae music, but because now our YouTube platform, we get copyright strikes if we use music without, licensing. So you'll just have to imagine some reggae music playing in your outro. You know how we love you, and the audience does as well. Thank you.
Yeah.
It's such important information, and we'd love it if you'd visit again.
Thank you so much. One love.
Dr. Peter Chin Hong. Yeah. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.